Good evening, and welcome to Food is Freedom, which is part of the second annual Food is Resistance event. Food is Resistance is a partnership between Michigan Dining and Food Literacy for All. For those who are new to Food Literacy for All is hosted by the University of Michigan Sustainable Food System Initiative. This is the 9th year that Food Literacy for All is taking place, and the 2025 course is organized around the theme of food and care. This year, the course is led by Dr. Bénédicte Boissonnion, professor and chair of Afro-American and African Studies, and myself, Shiloh Maples. Food Literacy for All is structured as an evening lecture series featuring different guest speakers each week, to discuss and address diverse challenges and opportunities of both domestic and global food systems. By learning from activists, organizers, authors, and writers, food industry professionals, and scholars, we aim to ignite new conversations and deepen our existing commitments to build a more equitable, health-promoting, and ecologically sustainable food system. Food Literacy for All is free to the public, and students can enroll in the course for credit. There are over 200 students enrolled in the course, and there are, last I heard, 400 community members and counting registered for Food Literacy for All this year. Free registration is open all semester, so if you have friends or colleagues that might be interested in learning about food systems, they're welcome to register and join us. To join the upcoming sessions, you can register on the Food Literacy for All website at this link. Before we hear from our amazing speaker, Tambra Raye Stevenson, I would like to express gratitude to those who have contributed to this event and to Food Literacy for All. First, the food you are enjoying tonight was prepared by the talented chefs at Michigan Dining. At this time, I would like to bring Amanda Ewing, the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Michigan Dining, to the stage to share more. Amanda?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Ewing. I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion for Michigan Dining. In 2022, Michigan Dining created my role, and in July of that year, I stepped into that role. During my initial conversations with staff across our 31 units, a theme started emerging about something that we really wanted to see. We really wanted to see ourselves reflected in an MLK Symposium event, and to mark the MLK Symposium and day was something that reflected our team. Throughout those conversations, I started to envision an event that would connect our team with the symposium by making food a part of the conversation rather than a separate element. Through our work on joint sustainability initiatives across campus, I connected with Food Literacy for All, leading to the collaboration to create this event, which is the second annual Food is Resistance, Food is Freedom talk. This partnership has quickly become one of my favorite events that we do. Inspired by food's role in resistance movements, our chefs have been invited to present recipes based on their personal interpretations of food as resistance, food and care, and food as freedom. All of the recipes tonight were crafted by our frontline staff for either this year or last year's symposiums. Please engage with the staff and their chefs and explore their posters and learn about their dishes and their stories. Additionally, this event is being shared across our dining halls tonight, so I want to thank the folks who are tuning in virtually. Thank you all for checking it out, for following the QR code, just to learn more about this event, listen to this talk. I hope tonight helps spark conversations about our food systems and the people who feed us. Thank you, everyone, for participating both in person and in our dining facilities. And a big thank you to the teams that have been cooking since yesterday to make sure that all this food showed up today.
Oops, sorry about your slide there, Amanda. Food Literacy for All is a uniquely structured partnership, academic community partnership, and we gain direct input from community partners in the planning. We would like to thank our community partnership with Oakland Avenue Urban Farm, the Detroit Food Policy Council, and the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network. Other Food Literacy for All team members that make this course possible include Sammy Molinado, Taylor Julene, Sai Shriveru, Dr. Leslie Huey, Tiffany Harris, and Chris Taylor. Food Literacy for All is presented by Sustainable Food System Initiative with generous support from School for Environment and Sustainability, the Program in the Environment, and the Center for the Education of Women, Francis and Sydney Lewis Visiting Leaders Fund. Thank you for making this course possible. Lastly, I will say that there are many ways to engage with Food Literacy for All. This is the first Food Literacy for All speaker of the semester, and we have a lineup of other exciting speakers. To join the upcoming Zoom webinar and in-person sessions, you can register for free on the Food Literacy for All website. Next, you can stay up to date about Food Literacy for All on our X and Instagram pages. Speakers provide polling questions for each session, and students are welcome to answer the questions using your iClicker, which we talked about last week. And all classes, including this one, are recorded and made public on our website. And before we introduce our speaker, we'd like to invite the University of Michigan's Vice Provost for Sustainability and Climate Action and Professor at the School for Environment and Sustainability, Shalonda Baker, to offer some comments. Shalonda.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, yes, that's awesome. I'm here for any event that both feeds me and plays music. So, this so far so good. Thank you so much for inviting me to give these remarks. Thank you all for being here. And thank you to the chefs. Can we give the chefs a round of applause as well? Woo! There's something about food as resistance on a day like today, right? Something about that concept right now. We right now, probably more than ever, need to find those pockets of resistance, to find those pockets of care as well. And it's my hope that we will all find those places of refuge, resistance, and care in the days and weeks and months and years to come. So we have to remember that. I am so delighted to be the first ever Vice Provost for Sustainability and Climate Action at this university, because what that means is that I get to connect the points of light across the university that are doing deep and transformative work. The Sustainable Food Systems Initiative is one of those points of light. And the work that you all are doing through this series, through this course, is a part of thinking through the types of systems that are going to sustain us. And we know that so many of our systems, whether that be the food system, the energy system, the transportation system, have actually operated to produce inequality, produce environmental harm, displace and dispossess. And so this program, I think, is a part of thinking through new ways to interact with the earth, interact with each other, and again, most importantly, how to take care of each other. And taking care of each other today seems to be an act itself of resistance. So I didn't want to start on a somber note, but we know the context in which we find ourselves. And again, it's my delight and pleasure to be a part of connecting those dots across this university and to be a part of helping to lead and shepherd all of the systems change we know we need for tomorrow. So with that, on behalf of my office, on behalf of the Office of the Vice Provost for Sustainability and Climate Action, I welcome you all, either here in the room or on the virtual, in the virtual world, to be a part of this event. And I am so excited to hear tonight's speaker. And with that, I'll turn the mic back over.
And at this time, I'll welcome our co-instructor to welcome our tonight's speaker.
Thank you very much, Vice Provost Baker, for those inspiring words. Yes, indeed. Welcome to all for coming with this very cold weather here in person. I hope you enjoy the food, and I also want to welcome the people who are attending today online. There are more than 200 people attending online today. So thank you to all, virtual and in-person audience. Now, we are going to, this week, students were asked to engage in several materials focused on food politics and the African heritage diet as medicine. And we have one brief student response video from Emily Paris, who was one of the students who presented a response video. So we're going to just play it. Oops. Oh, mine is Taylor. Everyone.
Okay, so before we watch Emily's video, we're going to complete our student engagement activity through iClicker. So for those of us who were here last week, we set up our iClicker. However, there are many new students in the class, so we just want to give everyone about a minute to get signed up and get involved. You can either scan this QR code here, or you can type in that URL into a web browser on a computer. And we'll give you about a minute to do that. I wish I had some music to play while we set this up, but I don't. So and I'm just looking around, sort of gauging where everyone is. Once folks look ready, we'll move on to the first poll question. All right, does anyone need more time? Can I just see a show of hands if we need more time to get set up? Okay, great. So moving into our first question, and again, these questions are based off of the required reading and the videos that Tambra shared with us this week. Question 1. Which crop was referred to as white gold and heavily fueled the transatlantic slave trade? Is it A, millet, B, sugar, C, cotton, or D, tobacco? And again, there is a right answer here, but you will not be graded on whether you answer it correctly. I have the results coming in here, so I can sort of gauge. Once we hit close to 200, we'll know most students submitted their answer. Okay, so right now about 59% of folks are saying C, cotton. 35% of folks are saying B, sugar. And the other two are pretty evenly split right now. We'll give maybe about 15 more seconds on this question. We're getting close. All right, so most people, 61% of the class, said C, cotton? The correct answer is B, sugar. Okay, moving on to question number 2. What organization launched the Free Breakfast for Children program to address systemic inequities in health and education? Was it A, the NAACP, B, the Black Panther Party, C, Freedom Farm Cooperative, or D, Southern Christian Leadership Conference? Again, I'll keep my eye on the poll. Once we hit about 200, we will move into the answer. And if you're a community member, we invite you to just sort of think about this stuff. You don't really need to download an app or anything, but we invite you to just think about it. Okay, right now we have 63% and rising saying B, Black Panther Party. 17% of folks are saying Freedom Farm Cooperative. Give about 15 more seconds to answer this one. We have 70% of folks saying B, Black Panther Party. And that is correct. Nice job. All right, moving into question 3. Which civil rights leader founded the Freedom Farm Cooperative to combat food insecurity and economic oppression? Was it A, Harriet Tubman, B, Georgia Gilmore, C, Fannie Lou Hamer, or D, Rosa Parks? We have a pretty even split right now between Georgia Gilmore and Fannie Lou Hamer. All right, the numbers are rolling in. C is in the lead, 76%, with Fannie Lou Hamer. Give this about 15 more seconds to let the rest of the folks submit their answers. All right. Things are slowing down over here. We have 83% with C, Fannie Lou Hamer, excuse me. All right, we have one more question for students for now, and we'll come back in at the back end, and we will have some personal reflection questions as well. All right, so question 4. Which staple ingredient in the African diaspora diet is often eaten on New Year's Day for good luck and prosperity? Is it A, black-eyed peas, B, collard greens, C, millet, or D, okra? All right, we've got a pretty even split. Folks seem to be leaning A or D. All right, got 150 responses. Right now, 68% of folks are saying A, black-eyed peas. 71%. Once we hit 200, I will reveal the answer. All right, So 76% of folks said A, black-eyed peas. And that is correct. Nice work. All right, so as we mentioned, every week we have students submit a 1-minute video response to the readings that we required for the week. And we choose one that we thought was the most special. And this week, we chose this video submission by Emily Paras. So let's check it out.
The money point that stood out to me that Tambra Raye Stevenson made is that compared to Western diets, there's a lack of investment for the African heritage diet. This is a clear example of how oppressed communities are neglected and not prioritized. And without a strong evidence base, it's difficult to persuade policymakers and those with power to take action. And so we see this perpetuates a cycle. And this leads me to agree with Stevenson's point about reimagining food as a tool to heal communities. Stevenson talks about Ubuntu, a concept of humanity with an understanding that our liberty is found together. And this reminded me of Bayanihan, a Filipino value that represents a communal spirit with an emphasis on collective well-being. Food to me is such a strong representation of Bayanihan in Filipino cultures. Whenever I'm back home with my parents, they send me back with containers of my favorite Filipino meals, like sinigang, pictured on the left. It's their way of ensuring I'm well-fed and nourished, even from far away. I'm grateful to experience food as an act of love like this. So what happens if we reimagine food as wellness, community, culture, as love, as advocacy? We can shift the focus from individual health to collective wellness, and this in turn can inspire stronger advocacy for more research for and with oppressed communities in an effort to break the cycle. Let's actively work to reimagine food as love, connection, and advocacy. Thank you.
Emily, you're here, right? Congratulations. Really great presentation. Thank you. So now, without further ado, let me introduce, I have the honor of introducing our speaker today, Tambra Raye Stevenson. Tambra Raye Stevenson is the visionary leader behind Women Advancing Nutrition, Dietetics, and Agriculture, also referred to as WANDA. Her mission is to cultivate a generation of empowered Black women and girls who drive transformation in the food system, fostering healthier communities through education, advocacy, and innovation. Featured in Forbes, The Washington Post, and Voice of America, Tambra champions generational Black health as the new wealth, rooted in her deep understanding of the nutritional heritage of the African diaspora. Her reconnection with her Fulani roots in Nigeria and her family's struggles with preventable diseases inspired her to advocate for food as a source of resilience and healing. As a staunch advocate for health equity, Tambra authored the Black Health Bill of Rights, adopted by the Council of Black Health, which is currently in publication. She has successfully championed a food Bill of Rights, emphasizing food as an integral facet of democracy. Her vision and advocacy earned her an invitation to the historic Second White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition and Health, manifesting her stature as a revered voice at the crossroads of nutrition, health equity, and sustainability. A fifth-generation Oklahoman with deep agriculture roots, Tambra's early involvement as a card-carrying Future Farmers of America member underscores a lifelong connection to agriculture. Tambra's professional journey spans roles in public service, beginning as an emerging leader at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Resources, later transitioning to public affairs at the U.S. Department of Commerce Minority Business Development Agency, and establishing a pioneer women's policy office under D.C. Mayor May Fenty, and serving as an extension agent at the University of the District of Columbia. Yeah, she's very well accomplished, Just a few more minutes. Tambra's commitment is further embodied in Native Soul Kitchen, a Pan-African nutrition innovative providing essential educational resources. Recently, WANDA launched the Food as Medicine in the Black Community Initiative, a partnership with Johns Hopkins University. She also holds appointments with the National Food Museum, and Milken Institute's Food as Medicine Advisory Board. She's currently a PhD candidate at the American University. I've just lost my track, sorry, guys. So I said she was a PhD candidate at the American University School of Communication, where she is an adjunct professor. Her doctoral research focuses on enhancing Black women's health through online communities, aligning with concerns from the U.S. Surgeon General's report on American loneliness. Tambra's extensive educational background includes a BS in Human Nutrition from Oklahoma State University, an MA in Media and Technology Democracy from American University, and an MPH in Health Communication from Tufts University. Her work, recently supported by an NSF-funded Wasted Food Research Network, embodies her vision to foster a healthier and more equitable future.
Another money point that stood out to me that Tambra Raye Stevenson. Another money point that stood out to me that Tambra Raye Stevenson.
Guys, I'm sorry, here it is. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker today, Tambra Raye.
I have a short little video to play to open up.
Black women and girls have lived in a world where we have been erased, exploited, and extracted. Yet, we have been the meal healers, cultural keepers, and culinary creators in our society. We have transformed food into our superpower
and aprons into capes to heal our families and communities.
Counter to the narrative, we don't just consume, we produce.
It is in our DNA. We stand on the shoulders of trailblazing farming and food freedom fighters on the front line.
From Georgia, Harriet, Fanny, and Wangari. From the streets to the sweets and tweets, we have been fixing plates and shifting power.
We stir the pot of food justice because we know the culinary currency that flows in our veins.
So we say no more to being hidden figures in the food system.
We are mamas,
aunties, daughters, and sisters.
We know our very existence is the resistance.
We transform our kitchens into the new underground railroad to food freedom.
And our gardens from trauma into fields of hope.
Now, more than ever, the world of food, agriculture, and nutrition needs us.
That's why we are leading from farm to health.
Because when we create the menu, we ensure we are not on the menu. We are not monolithic.
We represent a range of titles, talents, and testimonies.
We are a sisterhood from the soil to the soul.
A safe space to be brave. We create platforms to take the center instead
of the margins.
We build pipelines for a new crop of food sheroes to grow.
The seeds that we plant bloom freedom for the future.
We know that all we need is already within, from the wisdom of our ancestors.
We walk and talk with authenticity. We nourish our mind, body, and soul with self-love.
We ground ourselves with determination. We arise to actualize our vision. We return to our roots, which were torn from us because the land is our birthright.
We reclaim our foodways because diabetes and heart disease are not our heritage.
We remix our recipes with resiliency and ritual.
We restore our health with our food, which is our medicine.
Because when we reclaim our food as medicine,
we enjoy the taste freedom to heal on our own terms.
Like food and culture, our stories are our medicine.
So in this book, we are the food shero that our communities have been waiting for.
So when we a legacy of generational health becomes our new wealth.
That's why we educate,
advocate, and innovate.
We are women. We are girls. We are WANDA.
It is an honor to stand before you today at the University of Michigan to reflect on the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and explore how food is a powerful tool for our future. I wanted to first do a call and response, which is a tradition from my culture. Recently, I was in Kenya a year ago, and I wanted to evoke some of my travels into this talk today. And so when I say freedom, I want you to say uhuru, which is freedom in Swahili, Kiswahili. And so when I say freedom, you say uhuru. So freedom, 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 freedom. Sometimes we can take freedom for granted. You think that once you were born into freedom, that it naturally is something that happens naturally to you. But if we do not acknowledge that due to policy, through just human desire of creating tribes, that we can have our freedoms restricted. And today I'm going to talk through food as a metaphor of how that can look. As Jessica B. Harris writes in the nationally acclaimed book and award-winning documentary High on the Hog, our food tells a story of survival, resilience, and identity. It is the thread that connects us to our ancestors and helps us make sense of who we are. Let me begin with a story, a tale from West African folk culture about Anansi, the spider. In this story, Anansi outsmarts those who hoard food, showing that resilience and resourcefulness can turn even the smallest scrap into survival, kind of like a Black woman turning a $1 out of 15 cents. Anansi reminds us that food has always been from more than just sustenance. It is strategy, it is strength, it is survival. And that I want to share that I stand before you not just as a trained nutritionist or a public health professional, but a daughter of the African diaspora, carrying the legacies of our ancestors who transformed food into a tool of resistance and freedom. When we speak of food as freedom, we evoke a legacy that is as old as the soil beneath our feet, as enduring as the recipes passed from our ancestors' hands to our own. From Harriet Tubman packing biscuits and medicinal herbs to sustained journeys to freedom into the promised land just across the ways. To Fannie Lou Hamer's Freedom Farm Cooperative, feeding not just our stomachs, but our souls. Black women have always understood the power of food to nourish, to resist, and to transform. And another story that may be familiar to this region, that I love going to the American Indian Museum, which opened up on my birthday on September 20th. And when I worked at Health and Human Services across the street, I would walk over and I'll go to the second floor and sit in this corner and watch this little cartoon called The Little Boy and the Seven Grandfathers. It's a tale from the Anishinaabe people about a little boy who sought the wisdom from the seven grandfathers. And the story begins with a boy who's curious and young, who comes from a community that had been decimated, debilitated, all the D's, divided, and he sought out truth and sought out how to help by hitting all the cardinal points and learning from the bear, from the fish. And through that, he learned the sacred teachings. And there were 7: love, respect, bravery, honesty, humility, wisdom, and truth. And so when his body comes back to the village as an older man, he speaks to the 7 grandfathers who are like in what we call the heaven. And they share and discuss what are the wisdom pieces that you've learned. And these are those 7. And so the idea is that through life, through this human journey experience that we all have, that the goal is that we are learning lessons in our life. If we begin to see ourselves as an author of our story and acknowledging that every trial and tribulation, every pain that you've experienced, it actually is a lesson to transform that into purpose and, in capitalism, profit, but also acknowledging that there is something that suffering teaches all of us. And so this is what his story is about. But at the end of his journey, The boy felt something was missing, and so he asked the grandfathers, "What do I do with all this wisdom?" Kind of like the scars and the battle of war that we go through life, what do we do when we have these painful moments? As a mom, I pour them into my children of what are the lessons. They close their ears as teens. They don't want to hear what I got to say, but I know that I won't want my pain and suffering happen in vain. And so the grandfathers replied to him and said, "You must share it. For wisdom only becomes whole when it is given to others." In other words, how do you turn your test into a testimony? That story stays with me because what is wisdom if the stories we carry from our ancestors are not shared? But first we have to go back and fetch, as in the Sokofa tradition from the Khan culture that tells us if we don't learn from our past and don't apply it to the future, what was all of that lesson for? And so for my past, my great-great-grandfather, Giles Burkhalter, who grew up in Corsicana, Texas, at the time when there was land grabs happening, what we would call settler colonialism. And he grew up at a time where post 1863, we know, is emancipation. However, that wasn't always the case because his mom did not actually become free until post 1903, where she later died in reuniting with Giles when he settled in Oklahoma. And so while he was in Oklahoma, he claimed land, 300 acres, which have now turned into what we now know as Lake Eufaula due to Army Corps of Engineers and having eminent domain happening to sections of land that were native or African-owned. And so I learned from my great aunt Garvis Rogers next, who now celebrates her 100th birthday, who carries the wisdom when her land was producing oil. That oil became, in terms of the mineral rights, became the funding to support our family reunions over the years and decades. And that has sustained generations of our family. And two, tracing my heritage back on my maternal side to the Fulani culture in Nigeria, which I had the pleasure to visit and connect to those in the village. They have sustained me in carrying the wisdom of understanding the power of farming and healing traditions that have crossed over into oceans and became part of the American South food culture, and how my family today are still very much cattlemen, ranchers, and horsemen. And so we too carry wisdom in our own hands every time we prepare a meal. But like the little boy in the story, we must also share that wisdom. So for instance, in our culture, we tend to be oral storytellers and not write down recipes. When we hosted our WANDA Academy, there were a number of women who had never owned a cookbook, never wrote down a recipe. And it's like there's riches in that recipe. In having worked in commerce department, like that's intellectual property. You can make a whole business out of that if you understood the value of that recipe. So we must be free to share to not only our food, but the stories at the table. We must share the wisdom of our ancestors, their resilience, their creativity, and their strength, because only when we share our stories do we become whole. Yet today we find ourselves at a crossroad. Fractured policies, fragmented education, and food systems shaped by colonial legacies, the denial of teaching the full history of our food systems have left many of us disconnected from the truth, our stories, our land, and suffering under the weight of chronic disease while grappling with nutrition insecurity and health inequities. But the story does not end there. In Detroit, Michigan, and cities like it, the seeds of freedom are taking root. Black urban farmers are reclaiming vacant lots to grow fresh produce, turning food deserts into oases of empowerment. The community is reclaiming their narratives, leveraging social media to democratize their education. And through WANDA, Women Advancing Nutrition, Dietetics, and Agriculture, I've seen the power of collective action in the fight for food freedom, from hosting our sisterhood suppers, from DC to Chicago to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and beyond. to Ghana, to Nairobi in Kenya. And through these dinners, we're uplifting women's voices and building bridges through our meals. And through our WANDA scholarship that are now supporting more than 45 women in the last 2 years of our existence from Nigeria to Oklahoma who are pursuing college degrees in nutrition and agriculture. To our Little WANDA program where we've created a book to help take back the narrative of showing aspirational girl characters, of sharing the importance of their African foods as their medicine. But food as freedom requires more than small victories. It demands systemic transformation. It calls us to reclaim ancestral diets, support our farmers, and challenge the policies that perpetuate inequity. It demands that we see food not just as a personal choice, but as a communal right and a political act. To fully grasp the freedom that food offers, we must first confront its history as a tool of oppression. Harriet Tubman's journey to freedom wasn't just paved in courage. It was sustained by food. As I mentioned earlier, carrying biscuits and wild herbs, she ensured her strength because she learned to cook from her mom, and her mom taught her to cook because it helped to provide a livelihood. And not only that, she helped to feed those that she led. But even as food was her ally, it was also used as a weapon of control. On plantations, Black women were confined to kitchens, cooking meals they were forbidden to taste while enduring violence and exploitation. We would call these kitchen rape stories. Yet they turned scraps into sustenance, creating what we now call soul food, a cuisine born of resilience and resistance. In the book Food Power Politics by my colleague Bobby Smith at the University of Illinois, he says the dinner table is a battleground where politics, power, and identity intersect. Who gets to eat, what they eat, how they eat are all shaped by a system of power. In cities like Detroit, redlining created food deserts, or what Karen Washington would now call food apartheid, where fresh produce is scarce, but fast food is abundant. That's no accident. It's very intentional. And these inequities were not incidents or accidents. They were designed to disenfranchise and to control. And through history, food has been used as that tool of oppression. As Bobby goes on to say in his book, the White Citizen Council of Greenwood, Mississippi in the 1960s voted against a federal food commodities program that would help feed Black sharecroppers who were losing jobs because of the technology of industrial agriculture. And so those jobs meant losing food to purchase for their families. And so what filled the gap was the federal food commodities program. But there was a national outcry. This is the first time we're seeing civil rights organizations like NAACP, SNCC get involved, creating a whole food freedom campaign with Dick Gregory being part of the face of this national outcry where food is not being shipped abroad in the Middle East, but right here in America in the South to feed citizens. These discriminatory policies systematically stripped Black farmers of their land, leaving them vulnerable to food insecurity. Now, you may ask, why did they do it? Because Blacks like Fannie Lou Hamer in Sunflower County, Mississippi, was getting folks to sign up to vote. And so as a way to reduce their ability to participate in democracy, they attacked them in their bellies where it most mattered. Also, Frederick Douglass in his memoir vividly describes how food was being weaponized as a starvation as control. Enslaved people were given liquor as libations during the holidays to ensure that they would be too drunk to escape for freedom. If you remember Harriet Tubman, if you ever visit Cambridge, Maryland, the site of the Harriet Tubman Museum, she talks about in length her allyship with Frederick Douglass in helping those along the Underground Railroad, but also they would do that typically in the dead of winter, like December. And so the holiday time is when slaves could go to other plantations and see family members. And so this was a perfect opportunity to also plan an escape. And so in order for people not to escape, liquor, as what we see contemporarily in our communities, more liquor stores than we see actual grocery stores. Again, all by design. So Douglas recounts also that being given coarse cornmeal, not even enough to fill the hunger of a growing boy, the intentional underfeeding of enslaved individuals was also another tactic to weaken them physically and psychologically, ensuring that they remain dependent and less likely to resist. And after emancipation, systematic barriers continue to deny our communities access to food, jobs, and land. He also writes about, in his memoir that was published in 1855, My Bondage, My Freedom, about competing with dogs for scraps of food, underscoring how the denial of adequate nutrition was meant to strip enslaved people of their dignity and humanity. Hunger wasn't just a physical act, it was a tool to break spirits and maintain dominance. Also, in Nelson Mandela and his long walk to freedom, in his memoir, he talks about providing insight about how food was being weaponized in apartheid-era South Africa, particularly during his imprisonment in Robben Island. Mandela writes about how food rations reinforced racial hierarchies among prisoners. Black prisoners were given the poorest quality of food, often spoiled of nutritional deficiency, while white prisoners were receiving better provisions. And this deliberate inequality sought to remind Black prisoners of their supposed inferiority, even within a prison system. So hunger strikes would happen among prisoners, including Mandela himself became part of the active resistance against oppressive food policies, and these strikes highlighted how food can be a weapon of oppression. Another fun fact, that white bread was sold on the underground market, black market in South Africa. Even in the prison systems, you were not allowed to eat white bread if you were a Black South African prisoner. And so times in which the guard would want something from the Black prisoners, they will entice them and say, we'll offer you white bread. So if you were Black, you can eat the brown bread. If you're white, you can eat the white bread. Now, any nutrition majors in the audience, out of curiosity, what do we know about white bread versus brown bread? Which is better? Which has better nutrition? The brown bread. All right, so we're going to get into the anatomy of the grain. So we got bran, germ, and endosperm, right? So when you remove the bran and the germ and you're left with the endosperm, which is the carbohydrate, then you're left with an inferior product. But how race is a social construct, go back to the Belkin's rebellion in Virginia, you will understand that this is not biological, right? This is social construct happening, and using food as a metaphor to reinforce this inferiority by using symbolism of whiteness within a food. Next, we have the Irish potato famine in the time of 1845 to 1852. While not tied to Douglas or Mandela, the Irish potato famine provides another powerful example of food as oppression. The British government's failure to adequately address famine, combined with the exportation of Irish-grown food to England during the crisis, revealed how food systems can be weaponized. Again, the famine wasn't merely a natural disaster. It was exacerbated, again, by policies that prioritize profit over people. In this case, the survival of Irish people. Let's go to the Native American boarding schools here in the U.S. Native American children in boarding schools were often underfed or given unfamiliar, poorly prepared food. By forcing Native children to eat these foods that were stripped of their culinary traditions, boarding schools used food to sever cultural ties, as they did in cutting their hair, and assimilating indigenous people into Euro-American norms, which also prompted suicide rates to be increased in those environments. Now let's travel to Yemen, the famine crisis. In contemporary conflicts, such as war, food blockades have been used as weapons of war. Cutting off access to food supplies helps to exacerbate humanitarian crises, demonstrating how control of food can also be used as a tool of power. And then to our U.S. prison systems. Incarcerated people have often been subjected to poor quality food. A lot of times folks go in with no diabetes, they leave with diabetes. If you understood who maintains the contracts are the same contracts that have the school lunch contracts that are providing inferior food in the system. Johns Hopkins did a whole wonderful presentation about this that's on their website if you're wanting to go to Center for Livable Future. So now let's get into the ingredients of oppression. For centuries, sugar, white flour, salt have been more than just ingredients. They have been tools also of power and oppression. On my recent trip to Kenya, one of the parliamentarians, parliament members, gave me a tour, and we went to go visit Obama's compound, and we were out near Kisumu area, and he had noted that in an area that a railroad that was being funded but lost money and it was like the railroad of nowhere. This was an area where Kenyans were lined up by British colonizers and fed spoonfuls of sugar to help create a market for their sugar product. Basically, you had plantations of sugarcane that were being processed and turned into sugar to sweeten teas and desserts, and they needed a new market. And so you know how large England is, so Africa becomes a great supply for new potential of clients. So when we talk and understand the importance of forcing food that literally is not a part of our culture into a food that actually has diabetes on the other end, metabolic health problems on their other end, this is what it looks like. And so once called white gold, sugar fueled the transatlantic slave trade. Another fun fact, if you ever watched Amazing Grace, it talked about Wilberforce. He has this awakening where he understands that as a parliament member, he needs to do something about slavery in his country. And so one of the resistant ways that abolitionists, like in the state of Massachusetts, would do, that they would choose brown sugar over white sugar because there was less involvement in terms of force, in terms of hard labor that is involved in producing the product. In other words, if you were in the Caribbean where they're cutting down the sugar canes with the machetes, people would not only die from what we know contemporary as type 2 diabetes, but they would die in the plantations because of accidents. Occupational hazards would happen just by way of machetes, and you don't know who's in front of you, behind you. You're just trying to get your numbers up. So when we think about also another dear friend who happens to be a food historian, and in her researching her baking book, she had told me another little fun fact about how food, flour specifically, has been used as a symbol of white purity. She had talked about that in the KKK newsletter. Yes, they have one. And in the newsletter, there was a recipe section. And those recipes that were made by the mothers and the daughters and the aunties of KKK members would use Martha White flour product. And that flour product was to be a symbol of white purity. So in other words, you can't make a great white cake if you don't use Martha White. And so if you want to know a little bit about, if you love food history like I do, stumble across a documentary on YouTube by American Experience about flour. It's really amazing, the history of flour in this country and how that came to be. The other part, as we know, with white flour, it's stripped of its nutrients, as we just talked about with Mandela, and imposed. And white flour became not only a symbol of white purity, but colonial refinement. It was shipped across oceans, imposed as a standard of what it means to have civilized food, and used to erase the nutrient-dense grains of African heritage foods like millet and sorghum. And what was once a tool for baking bread became an instrument of malnutrition. White flour is a mirror of colonialism itself, stripped and bleached and void of life. It replaced ancestral grains that have sustained kingdoms and nurtured generations. Nelson Mandela, as I mentioned, understood the symbolism and resisted white bread, even in prison, for he knew that it represented more than food, but a tool for erasing identity. And for salt, in moderation, it is life, but in excess, it becomes a weapon of control. On plantations, heavily salted rations were given not to just nourish, but to keep bodies alive for labor. Over time, these heavily salted foods became staples in survival diets, passing down generations of overconsumption that linger in our Black communities today. This legacy has resulted in chronic diseases like hypertension, stroke, we can go on. And so these ingredients may be sweet, light, and savory, but there's a legacy of bitterness. And they've left us with metabolic diseases like hypertension and diabetes and heart disease. And they've turned our food into a weapon against us. The denial or manipulation of food isn't just a physical act, it's a psychological weapon that reinforces power structures. For the starvation of enslaved individuals to racialized food hierarchies in apartheid South Africa are just examples that illustrate the impact of food as oppression. Yet they also highlight the resilience of those who have resisted. But let us remember, we are not born at the table of oppression. Before there was sugar, salt, and flour that were imposed on us, we knew that there was a table of freedom. And it is a time to return. By understanding how food has been weaponized historically, we can better recognize the ongoing inequities in our food system and work toward food as freedom, equity, and justice. But history teaches us also that food can be that tool of freedom. So let's shift to that power we hold and can reclaim. Dr. King spoke of freedom and justice as a collective goal. But freedom is incomplete if we're denied the right to exist fully, to be seen, to be heard, to be valued for who we are. And that includes our food traditions. So you just took the poll about Fannie Lou Hamer and the Freedom Farm Cooperative. In Mississippi, she worked to address both food insecurity and economic oppression. By providing land to Black families and growing their own food, Hamer broke cycles of dependency and empowered her community to achieve self-sufficiency. Her cooperative model combined food production with political and economic freedom, demonstrating that food sovereignty was integral to civil rights. Your very own, Detroit's own, Malik Yakini, is not only a leader in urban agricultural movements, but also the founder of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, and also the groundbreaking Food Commons, which I've had a chance to shop and enjoy. His work has transformed vacant lots into thriving farms. I visited D Farm, it's beautiful, and provides fresh produce to communities who are in food apartheid settings. His work and so many that work with him are empowering communities to reclaim their food systems, fostering economic and nutrition independence. We have Georgia Gilmore. If you've not heard of her, Smithsonian did an excellent piece about her in her Club from Nowhere. During the Montgomery Boyce boycott, Georgia Gilmore cooked and sold food to support the boycott's organizers and participants. Her secret fundraising network, called the Club from Nowhere, ensured that the movement could continue despite economic pressures. In other words, her meals helped to pay for the civil rights movement down in Alabama. Georgia's efforts turned her kitchen into a hub of resistance and food as a means to fund freedom. And you took the poll on Black Panther Party. While they've been demonized, they became a model for a school lunch program with their free breakfast children program that the women ran. The free breakfast program was one of the most impactful examples of food as freedom by providing free, nutritious meals to underserved children. The Panthers addressed systemic inequities in education and in health, because how can you study and focus on an empty belly? And so the program not only nourished the bodies, but empowered communities to organize for broader social change. I say in a piece that I wrote for Milken about food and democracy that a well-fed proletariat can actually begin reimagining the society they want to be in. And that's why hunger and fighting that matters. For the Gullah Geechee foodways and preserving their ancestral practices, the people of the southeast part, what we call Low Country, down in South Carolina area, have preserved their traditional African foodways, using them as forms of cultural resistance by growing heirloom crops and preparing dishes like okra stew and rice pilaf. They maintain a connection to their African heritage and resisting the cultural erasure. Works like by Michael Twitty and the Cooking Gene, which I'm in the chapter Adam in the Garden, check it out, reminds us that every dish carries a story. Whether it's gumbo in Louisiana or jollof rice in West Africa, these foods connect us to our roots and preserve our history. And at WANDA, our little WANDA teaches girls to see their cultural foodways as a source of strength and identity. Now, what are the ingredients in food freedom? Food has always been intertwined with freedom struggles. During slavery, enslaved Africans brought seeds and food traditions with them across the Atlantic, preserving pieces of their culture, such as okra and rice and black-eyed peas became symbols of resilience and survival. Millet grows where other crops may fail. It's known to grow in semi-arid conditions. Part of the food of the Fulani people is growing millet, which Nigeria and the North are top producers of millet. And for those who have gluten issues, millet also is another gluten-free cereal grass alternative to consuming wheat products. It is a grain of resilience, rich in nutrients and history. Our ancestors carried seeds across the ocean, planting hope in foreign soil. Millet here is fed to birds, but you can eat it too. And as a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, we can strive. In other words, strong food for strong people. We have the baobab tree, which is there's like 36 countries in Africa that have this tree, and I've been on the hunt to find as many and climb. So far, I've climbed one in South Africa in Polokwane and also in Kano in Nigeria, but most northern places for some reason have the baobab tree. It's known as the tree of life, which gives us a fruit filled with nourishment and wisdom. Its sweetness is not a drug, but medicine, reminding us the true nourishment comes from nature, not exploitation. We have okra that was used by Queen of Sheba if you want radiant skin, ladies. It's rich in fiber, vitamin A and C, and antioxidants. It is a drought-tolerant crop promoting biodiversity in agriculture, and it plays a key role in making our gumbo, literally gumbo means okra, and stews and dishes with deep cultural communal significance. And then we have the black-eyed pea that we celebrate for good luck and prosperity with the collard green for the new year, is another great source of protein, especially since we're into these plant-forward diet movements. Black-eyed pea is a pea to consume, ladies and gentlemen. It has fiber and essential nutrients and iron and folate, supporting heart health and digestion and energy production. As a legume, black-eyed peas enriches the soil with nitrogen, reducing the need for synthetic fertilizers and promoting sustainable farming practices. We often eat these during celebrations like New Year's, representing hope and prosperity, but also they're just a vital part of culinary tradition. And then we have the holy trinity of greens: collards, mustards, and turnips. Let's turn it up. They're packed with vitamin A and C and K and calcium and antioxidants. They support bone health and reduce inflammation and promote cardiovascular health. Greens are low-input crops, growing quickly and abundantly in small places, making them ideal for urban farming and reducing food waste due to its versatility. The greens have long been a symbol of survival and resourcefulness in Black communities, traditionally cooked with care and shared during family meals. They represent communal strength and cultural pride. Also, we have a fiber epidemic. If you just eat greens, beans, and grains in all your meals throughout the week, you will have a good constitution. I'm just saying. Known for its high antioxidants content, hibiscus supports heart health, lowers blood pressure and aids in digestion. Its tart, refreshing flavor makes a natural alternative to sugary drinks. Widely used in Africa and the Caribbean and Latin American cultures, hibiscus is known by many names: bissap, sorrel, zobo, sobolo, ikabanjo, I could go on, is a unifying beverage for celebrations and gatherings. These foods are symbolizing a holistic approach to my food freedom and maybe yours. They nourish the body with essential nutrients, reducing the environmental impact of industrial agriculture, and celebrate the rich cultural history of the African diaspora. Our food, like our identities, have often been marginalized, but reclaiming our heritage foods is an act of food freedom. It's a way to say we belong, our stories belong, our traditions belong. For me, these ingredients of food freedom, the millet, the hibiscus, the okra, the black-eyed peas, the okra and greens, the freedom to reclaim our foods of our ancestors. In African traditions, food is more than just nourishment. It's medicine, it's community, it's belonging. There's a Swahili proverb that says, "The food that is shared is what brings people together." In my work at WANDA, we center the idea that food is medicine and our stories are medicine. For Black women whose health outcomes are often the worst in this country, reclaiming our food traditions become part of our healing. We live in a world that often stigmatizes foods from Africa and the diaspora as forbidden foods or hunger foods, forgotten foods. There's a new report out called Forgotten Foods. Look it up. But I've learned that embracing our heritage foods is an act of self-care and cultural preservation. It's a way of saying, I deserve to be well, I deserve to belong. When I traveled to Africa, I saw firsthand how the foods that I grew up with in America connected to my ancestral roots. I walked through the markets of Nigeria, in Ghana, in South Africa, in Kenya, in Ethiopia, and Morocco, and I just see all of these foods that are so familiar. There is a West African proverb that says, when the roots are deep, there is no reason to fear the wind. For too long, we've made to feel disconnected from our roots. But our food is our bridge. It connects us to time and space and reminds us that we belong to a lineage of resilience. So today, we still see the legacy of these two tables in our health and culture. At the table of oppression, we find chronic disease, diabetes, hypertension, obesity. These conditions are not accidents. They are results of generations of systemic inequities, imposition of diets that do not serve us. But at the table of freedom, we find hope. I say hope is helping other people every day while having optimism, perseverance, and enthusiasm in my life. We see farmers, we see nutritionists, we see educators, food policy makers, food media makers reclaiming the narrative in our land. We see chefs reviving ancestral ingredients. We see families choosing millet over white flour or reclaiming the story of their ancestors and writing a new one, saying they can eat well. As we sit between these two tables, the choice is yours. We will continue to consume the foods of oppression, or we will reclaim the foods of freedom. To honor Harriet, Fanny, and so many others who have fought for freedom, we must choose the table of freedom. We must plant that millet in our gardens, cook that okra in our kitchens, pack our plate with those greens. We must nourish ourselves with the ingredients that sustained our ancestors, not just to survive, but to thrive. As we reflect on Dr. King and his legacy, let's remember that freedom is more than about political rights. Dr. King's dream was one of freedom and justice. That dream is realized when we embrace all parts of our identities, including our food traditions. Our food is our freedom. It is a way to reclaim our stories, connect to our roots, and build bridges to our future. To achieve this vision, we need you to become a food freedom fighter. And here's how. Champion for a food bill of rights, because everyone deserves the right to food. Plant something, whether it's an herb garden on your windowsill or a community plot, reconnect and reclaim the land. Support our Food Share Freedom Fund at iamwanda.org/fund, because every dollar you spend is a vote for the world that you want. Buy local, support farms, and local businesses. Advocate for change by joining a food justice movement, lobbying for the equitable policies and amplifying your voice and fighting for food sovereignty. Honor your own heritage foods. Let's celebrate the foods that connect us and to our ancestors and nourish our bodies. Let's fight for policies that ensure that everyone has access to healthy, cultural, meaningful foods. Create inclusive tables. Let's make spaces for all identities and cultures at the table. Let us honor our ancestors by keeping their recipes alive, by sharing meals that tell stories of resilience and creating spaces where everyone belongs. My family's journey from Texas to Oklahoma, from enslaved hands to landowners, reminds us that freedom is tied to the land. The land holds our story, it holds our pain, but it also holds our dreams. And Harriet Tubman, the ultimate freedom seeker, didn't just lead her people out of bondage. She led them to land, to self-sufficiency, to belonging. She knew that freedom wasn't just about crossing a river, it was about planting roots. And so when my ancestors walked the land of Oklahoma, they planted seeds that they may never have seen fully grow. But those seeds weren't just crops. They were dreams, they were hopes, they were legacies. And today, as WANDA supports young women in pursuing their dreams of being the food heroes that their community needs, we also must reimagine our own dreams and how food is an extension of our freedom. I believe this deeply, that by sharing our food stories, we reclaim our power. By honoring our ancestors' recipes, we reclaim our food roots. By cooking with love and intention, we heal generational wounds. When I return to the table, I bring with me the spirit of my grandfather, Reuben, who walked the plains of Oklahoma, the wisdom of African farmers who transformed the land, the resilience of Black cowboys who carved out a place for themselves in the West, and the hope of future generations who will know their worth through the food that they cook and they share. Dr. King said, "I have a dream, but I say I have a recipe. I have a recipe for freedom, a recipe for healing, a recipe for belonging." And it begins with remembering the seeds of our ancestors that they carried, the stories that they told over meals, and the freedom found in the flavors of our past. And it is where power is shared or withheld. And it is where identity is celebrated or it is erased. It is where freedom begins or where it ends. Our ancestors knew this, and that is why they planted gardens in chains, and that's why they shared meals, even in the struggle, because they knew that food, it was resistance, food is power, and food is freedom. So in closing, I want to leave you with this message about a special group of people like you. The ones who feed more than just our bodies. You are the freedom dreamers and the culinary change makers who nourish our souls, our communities, our futures. You might be called farmers, chefs, nutritionists, educators, food scientists, food systems engineers, or advocates. I call you visionaries. Here's the truth. The people who plant seeds, both literally and metaphorically, are the ones who change the world. You're the ones who looked at barren fields and imagined abundance. You're the ones who see hunger and I think, how do we end it? You're the ones who know that food is not just sustenance, it's medicine, it's culture, it's justice. You're often overlooked in a world obsessed with tech and profits. Your work, whether it's nurturing crops, creating meals, or teaching about food, might not always be celebrated. But let me tell you this. Your work is vital. It is sacred. It is revolutionary because food is more than what's on our plates. Food connects us to the earth and to each other. It tells us the story of where we've been and where we're going. And you, the food visionaries, are the ones writing the next chapter. History is full of food pioneers. George Washington Carver didn't just see peanuts. He saw opportunity, sustainability, and the power to transform lives. Fannie Lou Hamer didn't just see a farm. She saw freedom, community, and resilience. These were people who understood that food is more than a commodity. It is a tool for freedom and healing. And now the torch is in your hands. The chefs who preserve and innovate the flavors of our ancestors, the farmers who work tirelessly to grow food and respect the earth, the scientists and engineers designing food systems that are equitable and sustainable, the educators inspiring the next generation to see food as a pathway to health and justice. You are the heroes of the movement that will be defining our future. But being a food visionary isn't easy. The systems you're up against are deeply rooted, often unjust, slow to change. People may doubt your ideas or fail to see the importance of your work, but don't be discouraged. Change begins with people like you, those who have the courage to think differently, to act boldly, and to persevere. And at WANDA, we believe in the power of food as medicine, as a driver of justice and equity. And we see you as more than professionals, but as storytellers, community builders, and change makers. And here's what I want you to remember. Every seed you plant, every meal you cook, every lesson you teach, every system you improve, it all matters. You are nourishing not just bodies, but futures. You are addressing not just hunger, but hope. You are solving not just problems, but creating possibilities. So embrace your mission. Stand as tall as a farmer, chef, scientist, teacher, or entrepreneur. When the world tells you it's just food, remember and remind them that food is everything. Food is health. Food is power. Food is culture. Food is freedom. You are not just feeding people, but you are planting seeds of a movement that will grow into something extraordinary. A world where food systems are equitable, where health disparities are a thing of the past, where cultural heritage is celebrated and preserved, and where food is medicine for all. So here's to you, the food visionaries, the system change makers, the meal healers, the culinary change makers. Keep creating, keep growing, and above all, keep believing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tambra. I think you really warmed up the room. Do you all agree that we feel the warmth? And thank you very much for this very inspiring talk. I have one question for you because we have only 2 minutes left. So actually, if you slip through the slide, yes, and we can look very briefly at those pictures. You talked about food as power, and you were inspired by Johnny Bobby Smith, which he says that he got this notion of food as power from the notion of war and international context of how nations deprive each other of food. That's the way that they wage war. But there is the counterpart, which is, as you said, food as freedom. When you think about war, you think about gender, you think about masculinity and hypermasculinity. You talk about food as freedom through WANDA. So my question for you is, can you talk a little bit more about gender when it comes to food as freedom?
Most definitely. This is an important question for me because I grew up as a tomboy in Oklahoma in a military town who was a congressional nominee to West Point, and anything that remotely looked feminine, I ran away from because I, in my 14-year-old mind, equated feminism or anything feminine as weak. And it took time to being a mom to realize that was such a wrong way of thinking. And I, since then, have taken this time in nurturing my own gender identity and acknowledging that in life, just like racism has us believe these social constructs that just because of the color of my skin, I'm inferior, just because I have reproductive systems, I must be weak. And so part of acknowledging the concepts of power and how it shows up in gender identity is to be willing to create a counter narrative. And this is why I've embraced communication just as much as food being medicine, because the stories that we tell ourselves, the women that we see in our families, how they've been treated or abused or misused or overlooked or silenced, where there's now a Stanford study that says that silencing a self is actually a key indicator of creating autoimmune disease in the body, which I have a number of women in my family that have. And I became very clear to understand that when I choose to speak up, speak out, I'm not only healing myself. It's like, as I said earlier, your test becomes the testimony for others to be willing to find their own healing. And so in the healing and truth, my truth is that actually being a woman, we are the most powerful. We are the creators of life, but we also acknowledge that there is a partner that creates life. And so whatever you choose to do is that acknowledge that just by the nature of you being a gender does not make you weak. Just by your race does not make you weak. Find power, find strength in your own personal story and narrative. And that begins by looking within your own families and saying that you can create a new path and change the generational legacies of your own family. Thank you.
So we are going to close the event for today. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to get more poll questions. Just one word about next week. Next week, our speaker will be, next week we're resuming back online. So we're going to be on the Zoom webinar. Our speaker next week is Paul Greenberg. He's the author of 7 books, including the New York Times bestseller, For Fish, and more recently, A Third Term. Mr. Greenberg lectures widely at institutions ranging from TED to Harvard University to the U.S. Supreme Court. His PBS Frontline documentary, The Fish on My Plate, was among the most viewed frontline films of the last few years. Mr. Greenberg teaches in New York University's Animal Studies graduate program. His talk is titled For Fish, Oceans, Sea Slavery, Climate Change, and the Future of the Last Wild Food. Why do we eat what we eat from the sea? And how do our choices affect marine ecosystems as well as our fellow humans? In this talk, best-selling author Paul Greenberg will take listeners through the development of our modern-day seafood economy. Along the way, he'll address how greed and inequity have created environmental and human rights crises that threaten our collective future. So please come next week for Paul Greenberg's talk. We're really very much looking forward to it. Thank you again for coming today. Thank you again for logging in today. Keep warm, please, and enjoy your evening. And thank you again.